Hello dear students, welcome to Bosco Campus Vision YouTube channel of Kottayam Don Bosco College. I am Raniar, faculty member of PG Department of English. This time I am here with the paper European Fiction, which is the elective paper for MA Semester 3 students under Kerala University. In this series we are discussing literary as well as historical background of Europe. We had already covered first 8 different periods in European literature. So in the last 2 classes we were discussing about modern age, and some of the isms or narrative technique or trends we have discussed in the last class. In this class we are discussing the remaining literary trends in European literature. So let's begin our class.
So, I would like to remind you the modern period was in between the later half of 19th century and the first half of 20th century. It came as a reaction against naturalism and realism. Symbolism was the first movement emerged during this time. It is during this time different schools of thoughts or avant-garde movements came forward. That is why this period is also known as a century of isms. Imagism, expressionism, futurism, Dadaism, Surrealism, Existentialism. These were the various movements raised in the first half of 20th century. So one of the important thing is that stream of consciousness, that was a narrative style, came during this time. As I mentioned in the last class, modernism was an umbrella term embracing all these modern movements. Now, let's discuss the remaining literary trends and concepts of modern age. Okay, so modern age, this period is a century of isms or vanguardism. About vanguardism we had discussed in the last class. So then the remaining isms, the first one we are discussing is surrealism. Surrealism was an anti-rational movement of imaginative liberation in European art and literature that was flourished in between 1920s and 1930s. It reacted against the established aesthetic tradition and sterility of Dadaism. The term surrealism was coined by the poet Guillaume Apollinaire. Surrealists, as I told you, surrealists reacted against the established aesthetic tradition, and that is why surrealists sought to blend the perceptions of unconscious mind with the external realities of the world. This movement influenced modern art, poetry, fiction, drama, and also cinema. Surrealism sought meaning in the subconscious thought and feeling instead of being merely a protest with a text of nonsense. The very famous surrealists were Breton, Louis Sargent, Paul Eluard, Hugh Davis, etc. Another important movement came during this time was structuralism. So, structuralism was a method of analysis used in many disciplines including mathematics, physics, literature, and also history of art. The term structuralism was first used by the Vienna School of Linguistics in 1920s. The very famous Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure laid the foundation of structural linguistics. Its essence is the belief that things could not be understood in isolation. They have to be seen in the context of the larger structures they are part of. So, structuralism is a form of criticism which sought to understand a work of art in the context of structures. Another important movement was New Humanism. It was an American movement in literary criticism in 1920s. It was developed as a reaction against the Romantic tradition. This movement was derived from Oriental, Greek, and Christian sources. New Humanism upheld ethical doctrine of self-restraint in the place of formal religious doctrine, opposing the excessive individualism of Romantic tradition in the name of classical order, harmony, and secularism. So naturally, Humanism reacted against Romanticism and naturalism. According to New Humanism, man is set off from the nature as a rational, responsible moral agent. Irvin Babbitt, Paul Elmer Moore, etc. were the champions of New Humanism. Another important philosophical movement is existentialism. It was a movement that rose in 1940s in France. This school of thought is based on the concept of the absurdity of the universe and the consequent meaninglessness and futility of human life and action. The very famous Danish philosopher Soren Kierkegaard is considered as the initiator of this movement. Existentialists often says existence precedes essence, and which is the result of free choice, so existence is absurd. This movement is a response to experience of nothingness and absurdity, which attempt to discover meaning through experience. Kierkegaard says, this world is a world without any pre-existing truths, values or general laws. The three German philosophers, Friedrich Nietzsche, Martin Heidegger and also Jaspers, associated with this movement. Major existentialist writers were Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, Fyodor Dostoevsky, Karl Marx, Eugene Ionesco and also Ernest Hemingway. Famous writers which flourished this movement were Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus and also Ernest Hemingway. Sartre's famous works are The Flies, Nausea, No Exit, etc. Albert Camus was also an existentialist writer. He is from France. He presented in his writings the feeling of the absurd and the plight of man's irrational existence. His important works were The Stranger and The Plague. Ernest Hemingway was an American novelist and storyteller. Pain, violence, sex, haunting, and death are his recurrent themes in his writings. He is an exponent of nihilistic and yet positive aspects of existentialism can be seen in his writings. The Old Man and the Sea, For Whom the Bell Tolls, are his famous writings. An important theatre movement emerged after Second World War in Europe was theatre of the absurd. This is a term used originally to describe the violation of rules of logic. Theatre of the absurd doesn't believe in God. The practitioners of theatre of absurd think that human condition is essentially absurd. So they believe in human life is a fruitless search for purpose and meaning as it moves from nothingness towards nothingness. So they believe human life starts from nothingness and ends in nothingness. So it is essentially absurd. They emphasize the existentialist idea of absurd but followed the techniques of expressionism and surrealism. The very famous writers like Samuel Beckett, he is an Irish-born French novelist and dramatist. His important work is Waiting for Godot and Endgame. And also Eugene Ionesco, he was a Romanian French dramatist. His important works are The Chairs and Rhinoceros. These two important figures were the exponents of theatre of absurd. Another important movement is nihilism. It is a Russian intellectual movement that flourished during the 1860s. The term nihilism came from the word nihil, which means nothing. Nihilism was primarily a rejection of the tradition and authoritarianism, but in favor of rationalism and individualism. Nihilists were ardent materialists who consider reason and science are sufficient guides in life. That is why they oppose the authoritarianism in politics, religion, and also morals. The leading exponent of nihilism was Dmitri Pisarer, who advocated equality of the sexes. So, these nihilists were believe in science and reason, and they reject the tradition and authoritarianism. So, this movement, it was a Russian intellectual movement, flourished during 1860s. Okay, so that is nihilism. The notable narrative technique that appeared during the time of modern age was stream of consciousness. It is a narrative mode or writing technique widely used in the 20th century fiction. This technique used to represent the thoughts of characters as they flow through his mind. By using fragmentary sentences and fractured syntax with unorthodox punctuation, unusual capitalization, ellipses, italics, etc., the practitioners of stream of consciousness technique use this. In the writing, it can be the writer's subject matter with one or more passages to show the mind's thinking or memory of certain person at certain time. This technique was widely used by the writers like Marcel Proust, James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, William Faulkner, and also T.S. Eliot. Marcel Proust his important work is Remembrance of Things Past and In Search of Lost Time. James Joyce's A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man and Ulysses were notable works. Virginia Woolf was also the contemporary of James Joyce. Her works noted for her stylistic delicacy and sensitivity with psychological penetration. Mrs. Dalloway, To the Lighthouse, etc. were her important works. William Faulkner depicts alienation and solitude in his work. He abandoned conventional grammar and syntax in his writing. The Sound and the Fury is his important work. 20th century poet T.S. Eliot, he was highly influenced by Ezra Pound. The Wasteland, the Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, Tradition and Individual Talent, etc. were his important writings. Marxism was another movement which was a political and social doctrine developed by Karl Marx and Frederick Engels. It is a theory of the nature of history and politics as well as prescription for revolutionary action to bring the industrial working class to power and create a classless society. Marxism revolved around the class struggle in the society, especially in between bourgeoisie and proletariat. Bourgeoisie suggests the ruling class and proletariat suggests the working class. So at that time, during the time of modern age, there was a strong difference in between this ruling class and working class. This Karl Marx wants to remove this barrier in between these two classes. So Marxist theory explained the base structure and superstructure of social system. Other two importance were pop art and minimalism. Pop art was born in the mid-1950s Britain. It was performing and realistic. Lines and structure were strongly clear and colors were bright in the paintings of those who employed pop art. The notable artists used this technique were Andy Warhol, James Gill, and also Roy Lichtenstein. So this was pop art was a movement essentially we can see in the paintings. Another important movement was minimalism. It was an abstract trend of art. This was born in mid-1960s in United States of America. Its focus is on the most essential things and eliminating useless things. Artworks of minimalism can be simply figures, cubes, or squares. Donald Judd and Robert Morris were the famous writers who employed this technique. So by this we are concluding the different isms or narrative trends. So I am concluding this modernism. It was a make new inform or content with symbolism, imagism, expressionism, and also stream of consciousness. So this paved a new way for the development of literature in the history of European fiction. So in addition to these movements, there are other forms of modern writings aroused in the writings of D.S. Lawrence. He produced novels of Freudianism and Conrad's oblique point of view in narration, etc. So in short, modernism is innovative, experimental, revolutionary, and also rebellious. If we analyze the modern works, we can see that individualism and experimentation were the virtues of modern writings. Modernism introduces feminism, homosexuality, androgyny, and also bisexuality. Modernist themes were various, which includes industrialization, urban society, war, technical change, new philosophical ideas, feminism, identity crisis, and also sense of rootlessness.
Okay, dear students, with this we are completing the modern age in European literature. See you in the next class with a new period in European literature. Please do the homework and send me back through WhatsApp. Then only you will get attendance. Thank you.